China has hit back against America's hefty new tariffs with fresh taxes of its own. Just this morning, President Trump threatened that the situation would get worse if China retaliated. The tariff increases have sent sensitive negotiations between Beijing and Washington into a tailspin. We now cross to our correspondent, Daniel Wanke's in Washington, to tell us more about Trump's latest move. Daniel, I mean, the immediate impact has been to send stock markets tumbling.
No one wins, Jane, in a trade war, ultimately. The tariffs can be used as a tool to basically do the negotiating. But now I think global markets are very concerned that this has gone beyond negotiation and is now entering into a full-scale escalation of the trade war, with Donald Trump last week bringing China's top negotiator to Washington and at the same time slapping $200 billion US dollars of Chinese goods from 10% to 25%, and then the Chinese coming and saying that they will retaliate against that with up to $60 billion US dollars of Chinese goods. The mood music between the two largest economies is not good. When there is uncertainty about global trade, businesses worldwide are unwilling to invest, and there are all sorts of potential disruptions from further Chinese retaliation, such as not buying US farm goods, potentially selling US treasuries, although that's seen as a long shot. And then Donald Trump's also threatened to impose 25% tariffs on a further 300 billion plus of Chinese goods coming into the country, which would include the good old iPhone and many other technological products.
All right, so the trade deal, what happens to it now?
Basically, the new tariffs that the US imposed, actually they put in a little clause saying that if products were still on the high seas, they would not be subject to those tariffs. So we have a 2 or 3 week window taking us sort of to the end of May, where no additional US tariffs will be imposed on most goods. And then the Chinese have said that their tariffs will be imposed on June the 1st. So you can see here, Jane, a sort of informal negotiating windows sort of opened up. The big issue here is that the US objected to some language that the Chinese had in a document that they sent, a draft agreement that sort of backed away from imposing sort of legal obligations on the part of the Chinese to change their laws. So behind the scenes, certainly the technicians can try to nuance that language and try to find a middle way. The question is, will the politicians be able to stomach it?
All right, Daniel, let's leave it there. Now, obviously, selfishly, we want to know how this heightening US-China trade war will impact on South Africa's economy, if at all. Are we likely to become casualties caught in the crossfire between the US and China? We have in the studio Professor John Stromler, visiting Professor of International Affairs at Wits University. Always good to see you. We'll get to South Africa in a minute.
Okay.
I first want to deal with this, which, I mean, it seems incredibly childish, doesn't it? And possibly childish if it wasn't so damaging. It's kind of slapping tariffs on each other. I mean, what is the end game here?
With Donald Trump, you never know quite what the end game is because he lives in the moment, and he's doing a lot of this negotiating by Twitter, which is not in traditional procedures, you know. So we don't know whether he is really ignorant of trade. He said that these tariff hikes would not hurt American consumers, and his own senior economic advisor had to go on Fox News and say, oh, yes, it is in effect a tax, but everything's a tax, and yes, it will hurt also China. So that you don't know whether he's just grandstanding, whether he's not well prepared, or whether he's just lying because the 2020 election is going to have 2 issues on his agenda. One is immigration, and you know the wall's never been built, and the other is trade, and the China deal is still pending. But my guess is he'll compromise.
It's basically easy to attack China. I mean, does he feel that that gets enough traction in America? Do people feel that they've been wronged by China?
Well, the markets have already spoken, as your intro piece suggested. The markets are tumbling, and people are panicking, even though there is still a window for some sort of a deal. And my guess is that the business community, the Republicans, Republicans and others will be leaning pretty hard on Donald Trump. You need to have trade in a multilateral framework, and this does relate to South Africa as collateral damage because, for example, if this escalation continues, South Africa as a primary commodity exporter into a Chinese market that's faltering would be probably hurt badly by this. And in automobiles, which the Americans import from South Africa, they also could be hurt over time. I wouldn't panic quite yet. There are many concerns in this trading relationship, but it should not be just in a bilateral tit for tat, which is the way Donald Trump ran his real estate business, not well, by the way, because he lost a lot of money in New York.
Yeah, and as you say, it is a very technical deal, and we certainly don't have to go into the details. But you wonder if there is a voice, another country, a neighbour who could step in and ring the warning bells, which we are hearing all the way from here. And would countries be pushed into a position where they would have to take sides?
Already countries are taking sides, and Rob Davis, the Minister of Trade and Industry here, warned us that this is part of a long-term U.S.-China competition. The problem is the helmsman right now, Donald Trump, is so unpredictable, so uninformed, so impulsive, but also so duplicitous because, again, he could be trying to make this a political issue now, not only for the campaign in 2020, but to take off the public's attention on his problems legally with the Mueller report and the cases that are going forward. So for a guy who likes to be the center of attention, he's now the center of attention. And as Senator Lindsey Graham said, he's very comfortable in the presidency and he's doing a terrible job.
Do you think also there's a standoff over disputed islands between China and several other countries, and the U.S. Navy is in that area? I mean, how much of this as well detracts from what's happening there?
That will be largely ignored, I think, in the short term. What is the bigger problem that was Donald Trump's decision to pull out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership at the early part of his administration? Anything that Barack Obama did, he wanted to undo. And he's not a multilateralist. He is absolutely the antithesis of the kind of leadership that Cyril Ramaphosa is trying to provide here as a moral exemplar character, but also a multilateralist and one who likes to deal with people eyeball to eyeball, looking for a deal, but doing so within a framework that can bring others to the table so that you have a win-win situation, including the Chinese, by the way, who are very tough bargainers. They're going to play Trump like a violin.
John Strimler, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Up next, Gauteng's school online registration delayed. We ask the department what went wrong.